Welcome everyone to the November board meeting for Ignite CDA, Coeur d'Alene's Urban Renewal District. And if you'd all stand and we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Any hats that we have?
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First item of business is public comment. Any public comment? Seeing none, item 4, we're going to do a consent agenda. This will be the first time we have done this, and it'll take care of the approval of the board meeting minutes from last month, October 21st, approval of the special call board meeting on November 10th, approval of the payables as submitted, and then also approval of the monthly financial statements for all 4 districts. I move we approve.
Second.
Seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Next, Parking Commission. Mr. Jordan.
Mr. Chairman, we didn't have a meeting this month. We're set to have one next month, I think. I can give you some updated parking numbers really quick. October in 2020 was, I don't know if you can hear me or not. October in 2020 was up $13,356 over October of 2019. A lot of things are down in the pandemic and certain things are up. Kind of like parking revenue, which is good. In the McEwen parking structure, there's 214 of those employee passes that were sold, and 102 of the regular passes. And then in the Coeur d'Alene Avenue parking structure, 260 of the employee passes and 26 down in that secured parking area. And also those permits, to allow residents come down and use the parking, those annual permits for the parking downtown. Coeur d'Alene residents, there's 181 of those that were issued, and Kootenai County residents, 76 permits of those. So that's my brief report today, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Jordan. Tony, how about the Executive Director's report?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First item is a Midtown Ventures LLC project easement request, and then we have in the audience here Mr. Nate Dyke from Headland Design that's going to kind of chat with you about that.
John Butler to come up and give just a quick update on some of the easement proposals we're going to be asking for. Actually not asking for, but so how do I jump over to the PDF? Let's see. There you go. Perfect. So here's kind of what we have now in the existing site. On the left there is the existing junk building, and on the right, north side of the property is the Idaho Youth Ranch building. And the outline of the footprint there is shown in red. And you can kind of see that it's overstepping onto some of Ignite's property there on the north side. And so what we're going through right now is a boundary line adjustment and moving that line over. As part of that process, we were kind of looking at some of the fire rating requirements and working with the planning department of Coeur d'Alene and seeing how we were going to address if that parking lot that Ignite owns, if there's ever anything built, 30, 40 years down the line, are we going to need to do special fire rating requirements and whatnot to accommodate that? And so we were thinking, well, we might need an easement on Ignite's property. But it turns out after kind of looking at it, we were able to, if I can go to the next one here. Let's see. We were able to just shift the building south by like 4 feet approximately. What that allowed us to do is avoid any type of easement on Ignite's property. Instead, there'd be a small 5-foot easement on John Butler's property for the parking area. And we thought this was a kind of an easier way to do it, since we're already going through the boundary line adjustment and doing all that. I'd prefer to keep it as simple as possible and not have to go through an additional request. So, and that's kind of where we stand. I think it's a pretty straightforward deal now. I don't think that we're going to run into any fire rating issues or anything like that on Ignite's property. So that was kind of the goal, is to avoid all those code issues. That's pretty much it. Any questions?
Questions, comments?
So if the board is okay with this easement request, we would go ahead and look for a motion approving the easement. As you saw in the easement document that I emailed out to you, there's going to be a little adjustment done once the boundary line adjustment is done, so that the actual property description will change a little bit once we get that done. But just looking for board approval tonight to move forward with the easement request.
I'll make a motion.
The BLA will come to the board also when it's ready.
Okay.
I'll make the motion then to approve the Midtown Ventures LLC project easement as shown on the drawings.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Tony, next.
Next would be inviting Mr. Phil Boyd for an update for the Atlas project, among some other issues.
Thank you.
Oh. Uh-oh, now.
Uh-oh.
Security alert.
Yeah, scary. Thank you.
You bring that down on a thumb drive, it's probably.
Yeah. So I'll start off with our park project update. I'll talk a little bit about the phase one, and then Tony and I, and actually Danielle as well, are going to talk about the Atlas development strategy moving forward. We'll talk about some architectural standards, the Amendment 17 that's in front of you, and then there's also some developer-funded amendments in front of you. Within item 3 there on your agenda is the gateway entry features, and Dell's going to be here to talk about those. So I'm just going to scroll through a few pictures here. If you guys have, you're probably aware the park is open because it was on the front page of the newspaper. I've got some images here taken over the last couple of weeks showing the condition of the park. You can see the hydro seat is down in the play area here. There's the playground. This is a big grass area here. Parking lot, this is from today, and it was amazing during the construction meeting because it looks right out on Suzanne, the trailer does, and the number of cars that were streaming into the parking lot today. So it's already getting a lot of use down there. This is looking off towards the picnic shelter here, and you can see the old flywheels in that area. This is looking back towards the beach area. Well, I threw this picture in because it shows the riparian plantings in here, so if you get down there and kind of wonder what those are, they're a plant that is specific for that zone that Dell picked out, BWA, the landscape architects, and they're in that little shield to protect them and stabilize them. This is a person that was already riding down the trail there. I was amazed. You can see I've got another picture showing the number of people that are down in that area, so the word is out. This temporary fencing that you see in here is around the areas that were seeded at the very last part of the project. One of the things that we're going to end up doing with La Riviere, or propose that the board does with La Riviere, is do partial substantial completion, because when you set substantial completion, the warranty starts. This seed was placed down so late that we don't want the warranty to start on that now. We want to wait till it's truly substantially complete. So that will roll till next year. In La Riviere, we talked about that at the construction meeting today, and he's fine with doing that. We'll substantially complete things like the parking lot because it's usable and completed, but things that are not 100% and ready to go will not be substantially complete, and the warranty won't start to run on those things. So virtually all of the landscaping, all of the seeding, a couple components in the building. There's a list of things that we'll bring back to the board for consideration. This is the entry to the dog park. You can see the little dell. This is another dell hatch deal, the dog swimming in the water there. And this is already getting a lot of use as well. So that's the update on the park project. On phase one, I think as I mentioned to the board before, that project's been delayed because the transfer of the triangle piece from the prior owner to the city was delayed. So we have been holding off because we couldn't easily get to some of the material that we needed to. They've started the earthwork on that. And actually, as I was driving here, Tommy LaRiviere called me and says, "Hey, guess what? We found garbage," which is no fun. It's a little bit surprising, but he found a big stretch of garbage out there that we'll have to deal with. The sanitary sewer work will start on Monday, but the milestone dates are going to push because of this delay up here with the earthwork to the 12th of February for the underground and the 21st of May. I don't anticipate that's going to cause any challenges with our developers. But if we run into some other ones, it might become a little bit of a problem as we move forward.
Bill, November 11th, it's the 18th, so are you talking about, it already
So,
started? or-
sorry, it should say what's next Monday?
Okay, next Monday.
Yeah, next Monday.
Phil, was the garbage found on the triangle piece or the?
It's actually, I'll scroll back to here. It was found right up here. One of the things that, and we worked this out with the city administrator, Troy Tymason, and Tony and I, the route of the scrapers to make it an efficient use needs to run through here, come up around here, and then it drops down and crosses just that tip of the triangle piece. And obviously, when that was not in public hands, you wouldn't do that. But we worked through that with Troy, and that little amount of crossing that's happening right there doesn't do anything to impact the future development of this property here. But the garbage was found right in that area right there, which is a little surprising because, I don't know how deep it is. The historic pit is kind of in that area right there, the pit that we actually mapped. But right on the edge there, they pulled the asphalt off this afternoon and started running the scrapers through there and covered the garbage. So we'll have to get a better look at it tomorrow. See what the extents are. So then moving on to the next item, and there's quite a bit of discussion, Chairman, that's going to happen in here. So I'll start to just roll stuff out, and Tony and Danielle we can jump in, and we'll be flipping back and forth through some slides. So I apologize for that. But the first one that's kind of on the board's decision tree here is the idea of refining the RFP, the A&E, and the DDA process. So the current method, as the board knows, is blocks of land are put out. The developer figures out how he wants to subdivide them, and he's responsible for platting and doing the infrastructure work. Now, all of the developers up to this point said, gosh, Ignite, can we just pay you to pay Welch Comer to do the work because it's more efficient, which is what we did, and it was efficient, although there's quite a bit of back and forth associated with that. And the A&E and the DDAs are a negotiated process, and Danielle and Tony can speak to the effort associated with that. The potential refinement that has been discussed is selling at the lot level in groups of 4 lots at a minimum. And the thinking being is that there's a higher selling price, there's a bigger pool of people that may be able to buy 4 lots as opposed to just very large developers. It'll streamline the development process because the lots will be finished. So platted and infrastructure will be done ahead of time. And we won't have this, here every week doing amendments to get some of that done. The proposal would be to make the builders subject to more detailed site and architectural design standards, and that's one of the things that was in your packet today was the proposal for doing the architectural design standards. And the idea is to try to provide more clarity to a potential buyer on those projects on what the expectation is, because the negotiation that currently exists through the DDA process would not occur under this scenario. And then Danielle developed the word of using a standardized DDA, which has a lot of less post-award administrative time, because I know Danielle spent a tremendous amount of time working through those DDAs with the developers' attorneys. So that's kind of the outline. What that might look like, I just threw a bunch of colors on the overview map here. The ones that are in tan are the ones that the URA has sold at the area level. And then the developers went in and chose to subdivide them in the layout that you see. The pilot project that's been floated out there is, do we take Area 8, which is currently platted, because remember, we platted it as part of Phase 1, but we didn't sell it because there was some talk of modifying Veneer Road here if the triangle parcel became in possession of, Ignite's possession, that was a good call by the board, because we have since then done some work on this road, and there is some pretty substantial benefits to the project overall if we raise Veneer Road through here. And I can chase that rabbit if you guys want me to. So the idea would be to go in and take these groups and sell them out, perhaps like they're shown there. We tried to group them together in a way that made sense. So one builder might come in and buy those. They might come in and buy all of them. But the RFPs would come in a way that they could be scored and evaluated. And then just the last thing here, because I knew the money part would come up, option one would be to sell them all 24 to one buyer like we did in the past, and under the original scenario. I took the 2020 average RFP price, because remember, that was part of, and then I just scaled it up with 10%. And maybe that number's completely wrong, but they are platted lots now, and there has been some market escalation. The developer would have to pay for the infrastructure and platting costs, essentially reimburse Ignite. And, there's some administrative costs associated with that, and I showed the board at the last workshop how we calculated this. So using that, the net revenue to Ignite might be estimated at 1.6 million. Under option two, if you sell the 24 lots in groups of 4, the average sale price at 125,000, and that's a number that Heartland developed based on their market analysis here. There's the gross, there's some sort of developer discount, you could say it, or developer profit, because, that might be, they're anticipating to make a profit on a lot sale. Infrastructure and platting costs, Ignite would pay for that because you are doing that work. And then there's a little less percentage. There might be actually a little bit more work with this, because potentially we're dealing with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different groups. So we tried to recognize that additional administrative cost here compared to here. But even with that, you can see that there's more net revenue to Ignite, and the difference between 1 and 2 is estimated at 880,000. And everyone understands that these are just estimates, and we're making several assumptions in there.
We're holding you to it.
So I'll just pause right there.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
So, and I don't know what the right way is to do this or not, but, the ones I've been involved in, I've never seen it where you actually take groups of 4 and say you have to buy this group. We'd price the lots out. Some lots, they're on a corner, or there's something about them, they're not as desirable, so they're not as much money. Other lots are real premium, and they may have a lot premium on top of them. And then somebody can buy a minimum of 4, but you might have somebody that wants to buy 6, or somebody that wants to buy 8, or whatever, but the lots are priced out, and they pick out the lots they want rather than, having them in a set group and say you have to buy this group. You might have someone that wants 6, and then you have to split one of the groups up. It just seems like you have more flexibility selling them individually. So I'm not set one way or the other. I'm just throwing that out there. I just I haven't seen everything, but I haven't ever been involved in a subdivision where they just put them all in groups and you had to buy that group.
The unique potential here, and again, Tony and Danielle can weigh on this, is the process that Ignite goes through, is this RFP process.
Mm-hmm.
And so we could go through an RFP process on 24 individual RFPs, but now the administrative burden becomes really challenging, and you can imagine the matrix if you had 8 different developers, each proposing on 24 different lots, and the scoring associated with that, and just
Okay.
the
So we have to do this because we're kind of stuck and limited on the way we can sell these lots. We can't sell them like a regular developer. I guess it's back to that again.
Correct.
That's correct. We have to go to RFP with these.
We can't necessarily do what makes the most economic sense. All right.
But I mean, they are, just to add to what Phil's saying, they are gonna be competing on price, right? So certainly, like, Group A may go for more than Group B because those lots are viewed to be more favorable, or vice versa, depending on the view and the size and et cetera. So they would be bidding on them as a group, but they, certainly, we're gonna take the highest price that we get for that group, right? And they could bid on A, B, and C, or A and D, or however that works out.
And we can't, what can we do as far as setting a price?
We can set minimum prices.
Okay. Thank you.
So will we do a estimate on that, or will somebody give us how do we determine what that price is gonna be?
Well, I know
Minimum
that the
price.
prices that Heartland developed were based on, consultation with the local realtors, including John Butler and others. I don't know if we would go as far as getting an appraisal. We could.
Appraisals would just take time and cost money, so it just depends on what the strategy would be.
And remember, as part of this process, these parcels 1 and 2 down here and Area 6 were done with, there was valuations associated with those. And so Heartland has that body of information specific to Atlas, and then as well as they have kind of the market data off of the MLS that they're using to guide their decision-making or their recommendations on values.
Yeah, I mean, I understand we're stuck doing what we're doing, but it's a cumbersome way, to sell development lots. But
Or
it
less
is-
cumbersome. I'd rather deal with, 4 or 5 developers versus 24.
Well, we wouldn't deal with 24 because we said we're taking 4 minimum.
No, but if we sold lots individually,
I don't know that we should, I don't know that we should do that. Even private developers will, have minimums. You have to take out so many lots. And sometimes they'll have a takedown schedule. That's different. That's something we're not getting into, but it's a little cumbersome having it set that way. I guess when I say cumbersome, I'm just thinking about how to get the most money back to Ignite for the taxpayers, but I guess we can work within that. And the way this market's moving, I don't even know that we can price those until they're pretty close, ready to go. And then we look at the market at the time they're pretty much ready to go.
But they're competitive bids, so really, I mean, if they exceed the minimum, who cares?
Yep.
Right.
Right, but the minimum, you'd want to have that minimum pretty close to market.
Well, to the layman, this seems to make pretty good sense, be a pretty good balance, and that, almost $1 million extra, and there's reason to believe that could grow a little bit more. That's kind of like when we really went down and fiddled with the lots there in the fort grounds, and then when it was all said and done, we came out way more than what kind of our first initial. So anyway, I think this is a good balance.
This is your guaranteed minimum, isn't it?
No, not at all.
And I think it's important to iterate the fact that we're looking for the best return on investment as well as variation. And since we did not really receive that in the last proposals, or RFPs, I should say. But I think that this Area 8 will be a good, probably first run at this, and maybe we change it accordingly afterwards too. We can have that flexibility.
Yep.
And just for the board's awareness, we still have continued interest regarding Area 8 from the Bluegrass Development Team. They're very much engaged and would like to continue down that path of engaging on Area 8. So that interest is still out there in the market for this. That we're proposing is kind of a different offering strategy than kind of phase 1.
Obviously, they're at this point offering what they offered us initially, which is materially different than what you see on that second slide, and why we would proceed to go through the RFP process, and they can certainly participate in that.
Yeah, because the architectural guidelines were not in the original RFP as well.
Well, and it wasn't platted.
Oh, true.
Yeah, it's a good point. So I guess the direction that Tony and I were looking for is if the board is inclined to head in this direction, there's some things that we need to do, one of them being refining the RFP, obviously. The folks that were on the committee had looked for a little more, I guess, maybe quantitative analysis. There's a little bit of a challenge, I think, with some of the scoring. One of the things that will be a little bit different now is there'll be an updated development standards, there'll be architectural standards, so there'll be something more to compare to. And we've just been brainstorming about how to make that process a little more,
Rigorous.
yes, there you go, yeah. And Commissioner Metz was on that group, and so to that end, what we intend to do is before that RFP is developed, is actually sitting with that committee and kind of showing them what the scoring's kind of looking like, getting their input, comes back to the board, and then if the board's satisfied, then that RFP goes out.
So just because I am on that committee or subcommittee, I just want to make sure that the process, that I'm understanding the process right. It would be nice to have a meeting to set what the scoring is. Okay,
You're
before we actually do the scoring.
You're right on target with it. And so I jumped ahead a little bit here, and I put this together for the board just because Tony and Danielle and I deal with this all the time, and you guys are looking on it on occasion. And Tony wanted to kind of map out to make sure the board kind of understood where we were headed, assuming some decisions are made today. So right now, one of the things you're considering is the RFP process. I'll talk about the standards a little bit later. So if there is direction to proceed with those, we'll be starting on that. There's also a task that we kind of just want the board to nod their head, that the city leadership had asked us to come to city council on December 1st and talk about the fate of the triangle piece. From, if the city gives it to Ignite, what do you intend to do with it? And gosh, if we, the city, keep it, what could we do with it? Which it seems a little bit kind of, if you keep it, it's kind of up to you. But I think what the mayor had specifically said, as well as Troy, is, you guys are way into this. You got a lot of unique knowledge about the site. Maybe provide us some suggestions so council has something to compare and contrast with. So Tony and I plan to go do that on the 1st. And then somewhere and I just put December 2nd, the development committee would meet and start looking at that refined RFP process, including the scoring. It doesn't actually come back to the Ignite board until the meeting in December. So this gives opportunity, we hope, Commissioner Metz, for the committee to weigh in on it, look at the evolution of the site and whatnot. And so that's kind of how we're hoping to address that.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
A little question. The city asked you to put together evaluation on a standalone process?
Yep.
On how they would do this triangle piece by themselves?
I guess maybe what it could be if it weren't part of the overall site. So for instance, if I were to say to the board, hey, the highest and best use of that property is to put two multifamily dwelling units on it, big ones, 75 units in there, and a big surface parking lot. My guess is, and certainly the development committee would say, that's not what we envisioned for that piece at all. We have plenty of multifamily here, down here. So it would be inconsistent with Ignite's development vision. And I'm being a little bit presumptuous, but that's based on the work I've done with you all. Well, the city might look at it and say, well, gosh, that returns the most money for us. Let's just surplus it through our surplus process and say it has to be multifamily. Those are the types of scenarios, Chairman, that I think the mayor just wanted council people to have. When we came out of that workshop meeting, that was one of the things that I think he had been alluding to, and I actually had talked to him afterwards and said, specifically I was trying to understand what you were saying there, and that was one of the things he wanted to do. He just wanted to make sure council had enough comparative things to look at. And I think, again, I don't want to get too far down the road on it, but I think the plan that the board has looked at here is a pretty good plan for the neighborhood, so to speak.
Did the council ask for the same comparative for the whole Atlas project?
I think it's because they want to make sure that.
Phil, if they kept the triangle piece, their only way of disposing of that is through surplus property, is that correct?
Yeah, that's me.
How many kinds of restrictions can you put on a surplus property bid?
What kind of restrictions are you contemplating in terms of utilization?
Yes.
I mean, you can always deed restrict property, and it's not currently in the PUD, but they could put it into the they could amend the PUD. I think we're envisioning amending the PUD to include the triangle piece, so then it would be subject to the development standards. It wouldn't be, what about the deck? We'd have to amend the legal description for the deck to put it in.
I think that if it was a standalone parcel, they would not have to come into the PUD. They wouldn't have to be part of the deck either, the master declaration agreement.
But they could choose to
They
become.
could choose.
And then they would be subject to the design standards.
So then you would have a little more control over the development, to what kind of a facility would be put on there.
Right?
So the difference is the money would flow into the city's general fund if the city developed this instead of in urban renewal, if there was a reason they needed
Right,
to do that.
for the water fund.
Thank you.
Well, I would just say, as one who was part of the process, I'm still a bit confused as far as what exactly, is the intent and all of that. So I guess, getting some more information out, but it's not real clear what's,
You're not sure?
no.
I don't see any advantage for the city to use their to try to dispose of the property versus having Ignite go through the process that we've been doing. I mean, I don't see a huge advantage there. Maybe, Troy, maybe you could give us some insight? I don't know.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity. The information sharing with council is to bring them up to speed and then look at a what if. What if we did this? So I would say it's a what if. I can also confirm that the city is not good at getting rid of land. I've been at this a couple decades, and I have done one tiny little piece of property, and it went to Kootenai Electric, and you wouldn't be able to find it unless I gave you a map. So disposing of it, you're spot on with the fact that declaring it surplus, I'm not sure I'd enjoy taking that to the public and saying that should be declared surplus. So our goal in having this come to council has been months and months and months of work on staff's part to acquire said blue triangle, do a trade, and bring them up to speed. And then suggesting to you that if you weren't as engaged as you have been in this, you'd want to know, well, what else could we do with this? And then the next step would be Phil showing what you have seen at the workshop to show this is how the road network ties together. This is how access happens up on the Jammer Lane. That's why it sits here. And so what we're doing is going, for you, it would be backwards. However, council's not up to that speed. As this comes together, like the windshield wiper moving the water off your windshield tonight, we're anticipating that they go, oh, I see what we could do. That doesn't tie into what our public looked at for months and months and months and all the input. A gated community there probably would pencil really well if it was standalone. Is that a community neighborhood feel? Most of us would say that doesn't feel like it. So hopefully with a little entertainment here this evening and understanding where council's at, we want them to be comfortable looking at a transfer, putting into play the master plan, and then if I can politicize, we're very much fans of your 4-lot opportunity. That's a real win. So I've got a council member that sits here, and I've got a mayor that sits here, and as you can understand, we have 5 others that aren't up to speed totally. So hopefully that helps. I'd stand for any questions.
Sure, thank you.
Thanks, that's good
You
enlightenment.
did well, thank you.
It's great having the city leader here to help. So,
Bill, just a quick question. Going back to Area 8, what is the product mix on Area 8 as is in the original documents?
currently, it's single family is one approved use in there, so all of these would be single-family. That's
And
one-
what is the lot size there?
About 4,200 square feet, 4,500 square feet.
Okay,
Yeah.
decent size.
The other scenario, and some of this will get shaken out, it'll come out as part of the master plan. One of the other scenarios that was shown in is townhomes along this northern edge, because they're facing a multifamily area over here, and then single-family here with an alley going through it.
And what's the grade differential from top to bottom?
Currently, it's very small. It's probably 5 feet from here
really?
to here. When we raise this road, it'll become bigger. It might be 12 or so feet from here to here. That starts to suggest a different type of product along this edge. It also starts to suggest that maybe an alley would be appropriate here. And when you alley load, the products here, it starts to look nicer because you don't have driveways penetrating this edge. These neighbors, instead of looking across the street to park cars, they're looking across to the front yard. So it starts to be a little bit nicer of a neighborhood. You can kind of see how some of this stuff is an evolution, where if we were to just stay static, and what we decided in May of 2020 is what we're sticking with, and we're not going to deviate at all, well, things change. This person comes in and they develop a certain product type. These folks down here come in and they develop a certain product type. And if we're trying to be thoughtful about the process, we kind of take a pause and say, well, gosh, maybe we should think about making Area 8 alley loaded. It would require a replat, but does it create a better neighborhood? And if we have a different elevation difference across here? So those are some of the things we're going to chase and bring back to the board in future discussions for you to consider, and we'll talk about it with our development committee.
Alley loaded seems to be a pretty successful selling product, so that's a good idea.
Yeah, and that's in the current design standards, but as we move forward, there may be a modification there, or we may just use the one that's there. But there's some idea that townhome or duplex on that edge facing multifamily might make sense, and not having driveways on this edge makes a lot of sense as well.
One last question, Phil. If in fact the purple area comes into the whole development, will Veneer Road still stay as it is, or will that be, I know at one point in time we talked about changing the direction of that, maybe making it a little less of a turn there. Is that still in the mix?
It could be in the mix. Right now, the thing that we're looking at is raising that road because, not to get too far off course here, Chairman, sorry. If the triangle piece does come in here, you can kind of see there's 4 lots right in there that are potentially very nice view lots. To make them more valuable, we need to reduce the slope of them, and you can achieve that by building a big, huge retaining wall here, which is kind of expensive, or you can raise the road in here with earthwork that I think we have on site that will come out of the tip of the triangle here. And so if we raise that, it solves that problem. It also solves a problem over here in Area 10, creates a little bit nicer character in the development, because right now this is pretty flatly graded across here, which kind of creates this homogeneous look to a neighborhood where, the houses are all they got the same roof heights. Where if we have a little bit of elevation difference here, we think we can do that pretty economically. We're currently in the middle of a little bit of an economic study for Tony to look at initially, and then it would come back here to see what that might do for us here, as well as here and here. That might have been more than you wanted to know, but.
No, it's great.
So I'll roll back to that one, and Tony, I don't know if we actually what we need on that.
Well, what I'd like to do is just kind of look at some of the action items we have on the agenda. So I would look for maybe action from the board for approval for a refined developer RFP and EDD process as we discussed. Maybe that would be the first action by the board if you're willing to kind of go down that path as Phil has summarized.
I'll make that motion.
So we're really changing the A&E process too, correct?
Danielle can speak to that, but I think the A&E process might go away.
I thought that was the case. Okay.
Yeah, our plan is to refine the DDA to something much simpler, and rely on those design standards that are going to be developed to kind of govern that design process, which would allow us to have a simpler document that would be kind of a, sign on the dotted line. We'd attach it to the RFP so they'd know what they were getting into right at the get-go. and then try to treat it like more like a true purchase and sale agreement.
Versus an A&E. Great. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor
I have a motion by Metz, but no second.
I'll second that.
and seconded. Any further discussion? The motion really is going to go from current to potential. As
So you will bring this back next month as more refined, is that correct?
Yes.
That's the process that we'll engage on. And so the timing on all this is Phil, kind of when we talk about the architectural standards and and to see if the board wants to move forward with Area 8 as kind of a test module on the smaller lot kind of package offering, is that we would probably bring all this together and look to bring Area 8 to an RFP like at February 1. Because it's going to take some time to develop the architectural standards, it's going to take some time to do the refined RFP and EDDA process and kind of get everything put together. So that's the kind of the time frame is that we can move forward with an Area 8 offering, just for the board knowledge.
any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
And I'll kind of chase what Tony had finished up there. The rest of this timeline here, you can see that we're going to go talk to city leadership, and then hopefully, city leadership says, the city council says, gosh, that, we'd like to think about those, but come back in 2 weeks. Because it's really helpful for us to understand the fate of the triangle piece when we're dealing with Veneer Road. And so we're kind of pushing on that 15th date to come back and say, okay, do you intend to transfer to Ignite? And if they intend to transfer, then we can just march right along. Come the following day to the board, we would have the refined RFP process a little shooken out. We'd have the master plan, development standards, and our PUD submittal. Because the PUD submittal, that's really the key. We need to put that in at the end of December to have it heard in February. And so we don't have a lot of time, we don't have a lot of slop in the schedule, so to speak, in order to accommodate the building window, because we want to deploy that product to the market, soon. I think as Commissioner Jordan mentioned, we're right in the heat of things. And so those are kind of the dates we're really pushing hard on to move forward.
So you're looking at then January 20th would be the best-case scenario for putting the RFPs out?
That's,
For 4 lots?
yeah, and it's a little bit, it's primarily driven by the architectural standards, because those need to be pretty robust, we feel, in order to get a good read on the impact of those on an area like this. And we need that criteria up front when a builder is looking at that they clearly understand what the expectation is.
Okay.
So one more quick question. We do this RFP, and some of the groups aren't taken. Nobody meets the minimum. Does that turn into something like the Park Drive lots? That we can sell them then like the Park Drive lots?
Good question.
Danielle?
We haven't talked about that scenario. Like if a certain group does not sell,
Well, it's possible not every group would sell. They may, but maybe they don't. So I'm
They
just,
don't meet the minimum,
yeah.
or nobody bids on them.
I do think that would be a possibility at that point. I mean, I think we'd have to look at what the next phase looked like, and if, the lots that were left over fit into that next phase well from a development perspective. But, I mean, that would be a scenario where we really did have surplus property, right?
Yeah.
If we had
Yeah.
tried to develop it as an urban renewal project, and for whatever reason, say Group G just wasn't desirable and nobody purchased it, and if we can't utilize it as a project, then I do think we have leverage to look at that surplus property provision.
Okay,
Good question there.
I just wondered, and of course, if you decide to do townhouses on the upper groups, and that's a whole, I was thinking single family on everything, but that's a whole different thing on figuring out how to develop those if the RFP doesn't work. But it's just a process we'll work through.
Phil, could you go back to the big map, the very first one you show all the time? That one. So I'm just tagging on to what Brad was saying. So let's just hypothetically say there's groups in Block 8 that do not sell. There really isn't anything other than, depending on what the triangle piece becomes, there's nothing else to really attach that to should you were do an RFP to the other property to the east. I mean, there's some over there, but nothing really adjacent to that.
I guess I'm not tracking on.
Well, I'm just thinking, okay, Brad said, let's hypothetically say one or two or some group of those blocks of 4 don't sell. And I was just trying to see if there was contiguous property right next to it, adjacent property where you could say, well, we're going to do an RFP on the next group to the east. Let's just attach them to that. But there really isn't anything there.
I see what you're saying.
We could still re-release it though as part of the next phase, right? I mean,
Yeah,
we could
I see
say
that.
it could be area 8A or
Yeah.
whatever, and we could just release it with phase 3, or, what we expect to happen with the triangle piece based on the current plans is that there would be some lots up there, so it'd be easy to release it with those. I mean, I think we just have to not guess on that stuff, know we
Right,
have options
right.
and.
I was just trying to kind of get in my mind's eye of where the blocks were compared to other developable areas there.
Yeah, it's just a moving target. This thing is just evolving. We don't know where the market is going and where this is going, so we just have to, work this out and be flexible and.
And it's a unique process considering you're a public entity. We all have a
Yeah.
lot of clarity, or a lot of us have clarity on how we would do it if it was a private process. This just has a little bit of a twist to it.
So for a private developer to have bought this property, private developer that had the wherewithal to bought all this property back when Ignite bought it, I think it penciled back then, to a private developer, but it's a home run to a private developer when you look at what the market's done now and everything, the appreciation since then. But of course, we're an urban renewal agent, so we're not a private developer. But we've taken a lot of the cream out of it. All the waterfront is being saved for the citizens of Coeur d'Alene. A lot of parkland is being saved. And I'm hopeful, when this is all said and done, the part that we can sell to try and recoup the money, I'm hoping that we can recoup all the money still on top of that, that the market's been kind enough to us with appreciation. We can, be able to pay the whole thing off.
And remember that the thing that's unique about the district is that you have increment, that a private developer would not have.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of the things that helps.
Well, that's
pay
the long-term thing.
Yeah.
I mean, the short term is selling it off for enough money to recoup the cost of the land and the cost of the
Infrastructure.
the infrastructure and
Yep.
development.
Yep.
And if this economy and this real estate market holds, we may make that.
And Commissioner Jordan, that's one of the things we'll be bringing forward here, is we'll start to be bringing some of that pro forma data forward to the board to look at in December, to try to add clarity to that. Again, the key thing is right here on getting action out of the city, or hopefully action out, or at least getting commentary from him here, because if the triangles in or out, that obviously makes a difference.
Phil, just jump on that too, just for a second here. Looking at the lead time from today to February 2nd to do the RFP for Area 8, what other blocks are we looking at for 2021 for RFPs?
So that is a question that we'll need to talk about probably after the first of the year, because one of the things that we need to establish clarity as far as the consulting team and with Tony and Danielle is, you start to look at infrastructure. Where does it make sense to do infrastructure? And is it the whole thing? And can Ignite afford to do all the infrastructure, or can it not? So we've got to go through that financial analysis. Assuming you can, that leads you down one path. Now you can kind of say, well, gosh, we can pick and choose what we want to put on the market. And I think that's where we'll come back to the board with some recommendations and options, and then you guys can guide us on how you want to see those Phase 2 RFPs rolled out.
Just because of the lag time, I just was wondering, what the schedule is to start looking at that, so.
I could get into another slide that I have in there, but we understand the pressure to get it done, and I had shown Tony the schedule. Of course, he wanted to shorten it up, but we're pushing hard to make that happen in the.
So when will you have the infrastructure costs? At what point in time?
When we get to this point, we actually have already worked on a lot of the estimating.
That's what I thought. I thought we
Yeah.
pretty much had them.
Yeah, we've got a lot of them, but just without the triangle piece in the mix, the matrix becomes incredibly complicated to try to articulate. And so what I wanted to do is just wait to get the answer on that. And then I can come back to the board with a pretty definitive path, and not 6 different options, but 2 different options for you to look at. So the next kind of element, part of this that's in that, the action item, I should say, that's in that is architectural standards and development standards. And so I want to make sure that I highlight the distinction here. So currently, we have a set of development standards that I think all of you have seen, and they dictate what you can do on each block and where the building can be set back and so on and so forth. But there are not architectural standards. What does the form of the building look like? We've struggled a little bit with that, with the process that we've gone through, because some of the products that have come forward maybe weren't exactly what the vision was, and we wanted to have some dialogue with the developers, but there was really no, I don't know if teeth is the right word, but there wasn't a lot of way to communicate that. So there's been talk of architectural standards since the very beginning of the project, and I provided you guys a little memo, or Tony a memo. We went to GGLO, asked them to put together a scope of work for it, and that's in your packet there. I broke it out into 3 pieces here so you guys could look at it, because the development standards, that component occurs if the master plan is updated and we need to go back with our PUD amendment. So we need to take that back to the Planning Commission. The architectural standards would not go to the Planning Commission because they're not part of a land use deal. We would probably take them there anyway because we want to show, I don't know, level of sophistication, I guess I would say, with which Ignite is executing this project. You know, you guys are serious about creating a quality neighborhood, and that lends to it, doing that. And then the PUD amendment is just necessary overall as we change things, and particularly if the triangle parcel comes into play, we have to amend the PUD, or we recommend you amend the PUD. So Tony asked us to bring that amendment forward today, so if the board wants to cut us loose on it, because that, our RFP number, Area 8 RFP, that's part and parcel to that decision. The development committee would also be part of this process too, where we would make a presentation to them, because they've been so intimately involved with the details of the process up to this point.
How much of it is Welch-Comer versus GGLO versus Heartland?
This is Welch-Comer's portion down in here. This is GGLO's portion up in here.
So, I mean, just looking at the design book that you did on this Rainier Vista, is that kind of the direction we're going, is to try to get to this level of standard?
Yes, and so we went through, Don Vagey from GGLO, the principal architect for them. He looked at a bunch of the different, brought forward a bunch of examples for the group to look at. Everything from, here's the 6 colors you're allowed to paint your house, and here's what the doorknobs look like, to something less than that, which is, you know, make it look nice. And then in between, there was a couple, and after the committee talked through it, that was the conclusion that they kind of liked the Rainier Vista idea. And the whole purpose of going through that process was in order for Don to be able to scope and put a fee to it. And that's where he arrived at that. And then Commissioner Metz, just to clarify one thing, there is a markup that's on those 2 things, because in our current contract, we have I think it's a 15% markup on stuff passed through us. That
Okay.
just deals with, you know, because there'll be some amount of time we manage the GGLO process. I'll be here making presentations. Don won't come here every time we are showing something on the architectural. When we do steering committee meetings, that covers those services. We don't estimate separately for those.
Okay, yeah,
This
because I
down
didn't
here-
see their rates on the other, on the schedule, so.
This down here, also on the PUD amendment, that's an hourly budget, because I'm not exactly sure what I'm taking forward. If it's a really complicated PUD and we have to write an elaborate narrative and examples and whatnot, that's one level of effort. If it's very small, then it's not a big effort. So that's why I had suggested to Tony that we do that as an hourly deal, just because I don't know really what the board is going to say, take this forward as the PUD. Is it complicated or is it simple?
So we would be looking for a board action on this item if the board is okay with proceeding down this path. As we outlined, these would be incorporated into the process. The timeline is that a draft set of architectural standards would be developed by end of December, and then the final draft would be developed by the end of January, which would kind of go hand in hand with the issuance of the RFP for Area 8, if the board would choose to do that.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, can we just do a check and see if Commissioner Garcia is on the line?
I'm here.
Okay, just checking. The next item is just following up on the conversation we've had about the Area 8 RFP issuance. I think if the board is willing to kind of give a motion towards that strategy of, as we just discussed, working towards combining all this energy, refined RFP process, architectural standards, in a February timeframe, if the board is okay with that, then if you could provide direction to proceed at that path, that would be helpful to staff and consultant team.
Was it January 20th was the RFP out for Area 8, or is that just not set in stone yet?
We would target tentatively issuing it about February 1st, because the final architectural standards will be done by the end of January. So the board could probably look at it at the January board
I see.
meeting, kind of give us a green light, but we would issue it kind of on that
Okay.
February 1st timeframe.
This schedule tried to hit all the board meetings, so we didn't have to do a special call. Tony said try to build it so we can hit the board meetings and we don't have to do a special call. So that's why you kind of see it a little bit early here, but it wouldn't actually be advertised until February, because the architectural standards won't be done until the end of them. They'll be far enough along that I can bring them forward to show you examples of them, but they won't be completely ripe.
So Tony, you want a motion and concept? Is that what you want?
Just a motion kind of agreeing to the strategy that we've outlined here of looking to issue an RFP for Area 8 about February 1st, 2021.
And all the other data leading up to it.
Yes.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and second, and then the concept being they'll be sold in groups with lots of 4 each. So,
Yes, as presented.
any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Did Sarah say something?
I said I am just very quiet.
Okay, thank you.
I haven't made
Motion
anything
carries.
yet.
Thank you, Jeff. And so one of the other topics we've had is entry monuments, which the board authorized that to move forward last month. Del Hatch has been working on that, so I'm going to turn it over to Del and let him take it from here.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. Phil and I have been kicking around a number of ideas. What I'm going to share with you this evening are, at this stage, just concepts. We've done some illustrations. We've been developing a little bit of character sketches, looking at the different materials we feel are the appropriate ones to use, looking at some logo suggestions for the overall development. First, I'd like to just talk a little bit about entry, monumentation, and gateways, and the thought of applying it to this project, which, as I've been involved with it through assisting Phil in the development of the park, early on in the concepts of master planning this site, it's a unique piece of property. It's a unique development to the city of Coeur d'Alene. So, as we move through this, keep in mind that what we're looking at and suggesting in terms of scale, materials, et cetera, are more than what you might normally see on our regional subdivisions or developments. It's what we feel would be the appropriate level that we might consider as we move forward with this. These examples here, I think the one in the upper left, somewhere probably near Las Vegas. The other one is a little bit more rural, as you can see in the character. They're both substantial. The one on the upper left is quite substantial. There's no real human scale in that slide, but I'm assuming that that's probably in the neighborhood of 40 feet in width and probably 13 to 15 feet at its highest point. So pretty substantial. The other one, different materials, the wood and the steel, frankly, are some ones that we're looking at as well. Here's a couple more examples. Also, the one that says the ranch on it, quite large, looking at a little slicker type materials, but still utilizing stone and such. So I think that speaks a little bit to our region and the region that these signs were developed in, something that we'll talk about as I walk you through these. And you'll look at the one down in the lower right. Now this one is much more rural, still a fairly significant sign, but obviously a different setting. I don't have any idea the size of these subdivisions, exactly what the mix of uses are, et cetera, but just wanted to kind of put some of these out there as we talk about what creates a gateway and a monumentation signage to a development. So what kind of materials do we think are appropriate? Well, throughout the design of the park, even as we developed the master plan for the Atlas waterfront, what we talked about was hearkening back to the history of the site and the heritage of the mill and things that happened. And some of the materials that I know that you folks have seen used on the restroom and shelter building and such, where we incorporated some Corten steel. We have some heavy timbers. We have some board form concrete, not only on the building, but on some of our site retaining walls, et cetera. We think that that started to speak a little bit to the mill use of the site, and it's one of the reasons that we decided to incorporate it into the architecture and some of the other site elements, as well as being fortunate enough to find some of the archaeological remnants of the mill with our big flywheels and stuff that we think are great because they add a little bit of a sculptural feel to the site as well. So these are some of the materials that we're talking about using in these concepts. The areas where we're looking at positioning these entry gateways, up here at the Atlas Celtice roundabout would be what I would consider the major entry point and gateway. Over here, as you would enter from Riverstone onto Suzanne Road and come into the site near the park. Maybe a played down or slightly less significant entry monumentation here on Hartwood Road. And then, even though I don't have any illustrations of it for you tonight, Phil and I have also talked about, is there a way to take some of the character of eventually what are the entry monument signs and scale them down, but utilize those, incorporate those into potentially road signs that might be located at intersections or prominent intersections within the development ultimately as it's built out.
I like that idea.
I put this one up here just to give you an idea. This is the proposed sign that I think it's just started under construction here a little bit ago. This is, and it's been slightly modified only in terms of its name. I think it now says Atlas Mill Park. But this is the sign that is right at this point here. So as people enter on Suzanne, they face this sign designating the Atlas Mill Park. You can see that its overall length from here to here is 18 feet. So it's a significant sign for a park. It's also almost 7 feet high at the tallest timber. So it's utilizing timber, board form concrete, and some of the hardware that are holding up the posts and support all our heavy steel, et cetera. Again, part of the idea to capture that look of what the mill construction was. So, if we're looking at the Atlas and Celtice roundabout, and we're approaching always from the right, we have this concept put together. And I have a blow up here that you can probably see a little bit more detail. This would also be concrete and board formed. And I've taken a similar arch to the top of that it was presented in the park sign itself, trying to maintain a little bit of consistency through development and not have different looks throughout the development. Also took a look at development of a logo, and one that could capture the fact that the name is Atlas Waterfront and the fact that this is on this historic mill site. And then, so this logo starts to take in the look of a saw blade and also has this little bit of freeform wave movement to it there. The materials that we're looking at, obviously some timber construction in support. This piece of concrete actually sits between those timbers and those timbers on each side. This we're looking at potentially as a concrete base on either side, which supports the overall sign. Some core tin accent at these points. And then something that might be just as important is, in addition to the sign, is a continuation of the development, and to at least some extent that might be a panelized screen fence, not one that's totally solid and one that's not totally transparent, but ones that would have cutout openings in it of similar material, probably treated in this case to a potentially a core tin finish. Plantings that would extend some of the same feel that are at the center of the roundabout at this location. Here's a little bit closer look so you can start to see this board form finish. We see that as a core tin panel as a logo, slightly potentially offset from the face so that during the day it would actually pick up a shadow line. In the evening, an opportunity to put some soft light behind it so that the logo would glow against that backdrop of the sign. Again, some core tin panels, heavy wood timbers. Obviously, there's going to be some heavy fasteners and brackets, etc. There's the opportunity, not a lot of opportunity, as I show you in the next slide, the plan location, but to soften its base with some plantings and to accent on either side, and then potentially even also to soften those panels that might fall along the sidewalk as people would move into the project.
Would it soften it a bit if you put like river rock on that of something, you know, I mean, it's water.
Actually, one early concept we had this as our board form concrete. We actually did show some rock on either of those bases, which I still think is kind
of breaks it up a little bit.
An appropriate use if we want to add another material. I think we want to be very prudent about how many materials we look to introduce into an element like this, how many textures and colors and things like that. But we did consider a stone base for both of these elements here. And again, as I mentioned, these are concepts. We think the size, the scale, the proportions are starting to work pretty well, but it doesn't mean that things like that, areas of it, can't change. Now, on the other side, so this was sort of on the eastern side of the roundabout as it funnels in off of Atlas. On the western side, or the Hutter side, one thing we did not feel would be necessarily appropriate is to mirror this entire same signage that we had on the other side over to this side. So you can see that it starts to pick up what might be, let's say, this one to about that point. It starts to take the same scale, the same character, all the same materials, but it's only limited to, say, from this point this way. Still picking up some of the use of those decorative panels that we think also may help screen beyond it to what will be, in some cases, potentially parking lots and things like that. And on the eastern side, even the potential of a building to help cut glare of headlights moving around the roundabout into windows and things like that. So this, if you can envision it, is on the Hutter side of that roundabout. If we look at it in plan view, here's north, here's our roundabout up here. It only shows one lane, actually. As you all know, it's a double roundabout. So it's on this side over here that we're proposing the more monumental side of this entry gateway. And our reasoning is, you can see what these two blue arrows is that when people approach and are going to be entering at this location, they're always entering from this direction. Whether they're coming in this direction, they go around the roundabout and would enter this way. So as they're here, they're presented the major portion of the entry gateway signage. If they're coming from the Hutter side, they're always approaching in this fashion, and they're presented the major portion of the gateway. On this side, it shows the smaller component. This shows the larger component and some of the decorative fencing that I was suggesting that might carry into the project, possibly to the crosswalk location, or maybe even further. You can see when I mentioned that we have just a little bit of greenery in front of it and a little bit of greenery in front of it here. This is a tight location, and as a major entryway, it's also a tight location to try and incorporate a gateway monumentation sign of the scale we're suggesting. So what Phil and I talked about was, under their preliminary grading plan right now, the entry road is higher than the ground on this side or the ground on this side. So this red area through here that extends up to about this location, and this red area that extends from here and kind of sweeps in that, those were always intended to be retaining walls that would essentially support the roadway and to the ground that was below it on the side. So our concept and discussions were, what if we, since we're going to have the majority of that supported with a wall to begin with, what if we take and try and incorporate this monumentation sign as sort of a vertical extension of the wall itself, which is what we're suggesting here. Now you can see this red line here, and it kind of cuts through and then sweeps back in that fashion. That's the current concept alignment of our trail that moves towards Coeur d'Alene. You can see that we've realigned it, tying it back in at this point and realigning it here so that we have a little more room behind this to straighten out this signage component that we're looking at. It's very it would be very challenging to make the concept I just showed you in a big sweeping arc. But if we're able to realign the retaining wall, add to it slightly, the wall was going to be there regardless, and the same over here, the wall would end here. That's the concept of what we're doing. It essentially makes a very close backdrop to the back of sidewalk or the back of trail. Any comments or questions? Everybody understand how that's proposed to work? So what might we do as a secondary entryway if we chose to make Heartwood Road have some sort of a distinguished gateway as well? Excuse me, not necessarily enhanced to the same scale that we would at Atlas. Again, utilizing those same components. This is pretty much the Hutter side or the east side of what you saw at Atlas, but this one would be mirrored. This one would be given an equal treatment, not possibly as much panelized fencing moving in, but I think those elements still help to kind of anchor these two major elements, and then this entryway with street trees, etc. I put people into all of these just to give you an idea of what we think the proportion and scale of these would be. So if that person is 6 feet tall, this upper element is probably approaching 13 to 14 feet. The other one that is, that we've talked about from day one, because we were looking at it as the early gateway design, is Suzanne. And at Suzanne, we have the Prairie Trail moving north-south, crossing Suzanne. Excuse me, and then we have sidewalks moving east-west into the project from the Riverstone side as well. So we have bikers, we have joggers, we have walkers, we have strollers, we have a lot of stuff happening there. My concern and comments when Phil and I started to look at this one were, how do we maintain the look and feel of what we're suggesting at these other entry points, but not totally block it off by bringing everything we're doing all the way to the ground, so that we have an opportunity for drivers as they approach this crossing to see people approaching the crossing as well. So here are the sidewalks on both sides that are moving east-west. The jogger here is on the Prairie Trail that moves north-south. So we've lowered this foundation element of the sign, still keeping it in the same material and basically the same proportions with our timbers, but we've raised this component that would have been right down here. We've raised it up, keeping clearance off the roadway for the height. In this case, I would envision these as not being concrete, but I see those as potentially Corten panels, and the logo itself being cut out of that Corten panel, so it's almost silhouetted. I wouldn't want to try and figure out how I get the weight of a piece of concrete up that high, and I think it would be inappropriate regardless. So I think this would be looked at as a Corten type panel. Now, the one thing I haven't looked at in detail yet is, how do we accent these with light at night? I think there's all kinds of opportunities to do it, and I mentioned the one on the logo of the large one. But I think there's opportunities to incorporate lights into the corners of these timbers that could shine onto these elements, or have uplights that are hitting them here. Keep in mind, there are already street lights, and I think a major one, Phil, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's a major street light right here at the crossing. So our concerns here are, how do we make it light enough that we can maintain the safety of people using sidewalks and trails at the crossing of with the vehicles, yet how do we maintain some of the same materiality that we're suggesting that might work at the other locations? If you look at this location in plan view, it's fairly, we're fairly tight in here, and what I don't show, there are some traffic signs at this location. There are signs for the trail to make the trail users aware. There's a light that I mentioned that sits about here. I think, Phil, there's even potentially a few utility pads in here. But at this point, I'm looking at them being mounted here and here. And again, as vehicles would approach in this lane, letting them so I'm putting them on this side, so this view is fairly clear. As people would exit through here, this one still has the most potential to block a view, but still they can see people unless they're right behind the post, right there. It's still fairly open, so the blue areas there, we wanted to maintain as much openness as we could.
See, I happened to drive down there this afternoon to take a look at things, and one thing that, in kind of visualizing that and the different things that are there already is it's a nice element, but are the flashing lights for the, there's one of those crossing guard kind of lights,
Oh.
and it really flashes.
They get your attention.
Which is good for some things, but it would, I don't know how that'll
Well,
tie in.
I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
These types of design problems can be challenging, because at points of potential conflict with cars and people, there are always signs, there are flashing lights. It can tend to make that area look somewhat chaotic, which is one reason why, if I sketched all that other stuff in here, it would tend to look a little busy, which is why I think these at least have to be prominent enough that as you approach it, that's what catches your attention and your eye in terms of the overall development. The flashing lights, I think, are always going to get the driver's attention.
I guess at least the lights aren't flashing all the time.
Yeah, I think they're actually personally activated, is that right?
I think,
If
isn't
somebody
that
wants
the
to
kind?
cross,
Motion.
yeah. But they tend to probably keep flashing a little bit once the person's already crossed, so.
And, very familiar with that, I mean, because I've used that trail a lot. I mean, that is a tight choke point, and in the summer, it is, I mean, it's thick in both directions, but that's what it is.
And I think there's also, Phil, there's also markings on the trail to warn people using the trail, hey, this is a choke point, slow down, take some caution as you're crossing this roadway. So it's pretty rare that we develop only one concept for anything. So as we looked at it, our first inclination and that logo that I showed you earlier was, how do we combine a logo and a feel that can still speak to the site's history as a mill? And then you saw that logo and you saw the wave kind of moving through that logo of the saw blade. This is another look that we considered, since the name is Atlas Waterfront, sort of a wave type pattern that becomes sort of the logo for this development. In my mind, it doesn't speak as much to the fact that this is not only Atlas Waterfront, but it's also historic Atlas Mill site. But I do think it has some potential. It would be a less expensive proposal as the main element. We have worked in, there's an awful lot of rock on our project, as you folks know, along our shoreline, in our parks, et cetera. So we started to soften it a little bit by introducing some of that as purely a landscape element. But the core tin, the wood, this now suggests what the logo might be. And this, instead of concrete, would be a core tin panel with the name cut as a silhouette out of it. It could have a backing behind it as well that could have a light element, so in the evening. So if you can envision a light panel behind it and then lighting, hidden lighting on this side, so at night the Atlas Waterfront would actually glow. So this is another concept. Would appreciate your thoughts on both of these. I have not taken this to the same extent I took the others that show it flanking at Heartwood or utilized it at Suzanne, but if this is the one you feel is one that kind of speaks to you as the choice to move forward with, I'm confident that we could still incorporate it there too.
I'll speak up really quick. I've known you for a long time, Dale. You've worked on a lot of projects, and you're really talented. I wish I had 1% of the talent that you have. I like this one better. I think it flows better, and it's more sophisticated looking, and I don't know. There's something about, maybe the saw blade is overkill, but I think the pilings, if I take those as pilings there, they tie into the mill, and then you have a lot of pieces of artwork like the old wheels and pulleys and different things down in there that tie into it. So I don't think you have to have a saw blade everywhere to tie into the mill. I just think that flows nice and has a really classy look to it.
Yeah, I would second that. I mean, just for first impressions, yeah, that one, oh yeah, that's it. But
I actually like the first one
I
better.
did too.
there you go. You like
But I'm not the expert, so.
And
Well-
Dan's a Democrat, and here he and I agree on all this.
You could do a hybrid model.
Well, the first one also matches what the sign is down at the park.
It starts to pick up on what we did at the park, yes. I too think
Not
this
that
is
that's
a
necessary, but-
really nice solution. I do think it is, all of this stuff is pretty subjective, as you just demonstrated. But this is a little bit more refined. I think it's not quite as rough or northwesty as the other one but it's still utilizing all the same materials that we were looking at in the other one. It's just that rather than concrete here, this is now a Corten panel.
So how will that weather and how will that, what will this one look like 10 years from now? I mean, obviously concrete weathers very well.
Concrete's going to weather very well. Corten weathers very well as well. Ideally, anything that's utilized in construction of Corten should be what we call pre-rusted. It comes early, it's set out in the weather, it's allowed to rust away, and because it rusts to a certain point, and it forms essentially a patina on it, and then the rusting stops. If you're not able to do that in some cases, if it continues to rust once it's already erected or put into some sort of a design element and there's concrete or something like that near it, it can drip and stain. You can also pre-rust those elements by using sort of an acid wash, which sort of accelerates that rusting. But in my mind, it would look very much like this over a 10-year period. This element would be, in my mind, made out of metal. And you can see that we've added a little bit of color here because that's the other thing I like about this one is it adds sort of that splash of color. And if it were in the blue, aqua, greenish range, it suggests waterfront.
Yeah, I like that.
And that would more than likely be a powder coat type finish, which, as you know, is a fairly durable finish.
Could you go back to your original map where you were showing the various locations of the signs? Right there. So where is the sign going that's already under construction that's going to be for the waterfront?
For the park?
Yes.
It sits right here at the south end of the intersection of Suzanne and Atlas.
Okay.
That park is right there. So it's technically, Phil asked me this question one time because I didn't center on the center line of the road. We actually shifted it slightly to the west. It's actually centered on the approach lane of Atlas, or on Atlas of Suzanne. So as you would drive down in your car at this point, you'd be looking straight at that sign.
What is the price difference between the two?
Pardon me?
What is the price difference between the two?
Well, let's go back here and I don't have a
roughly,
slide that
maybe.
actually says, here's the price. We're still refining that price, but
It all sounds expensive, but
I do have
When we like the best, and then he'll price it.
I have some,
it looks great.
to give you an idea, this sign that is basically 18 feet by, let's say it's in that range of 8 to 9 feet roughly. This one, I believe, was $14,000. 15? Yeah, so this kind of stuff is not inexpensive.
No, that's,
I remember when we did the signage for the NIC property over there.
yeah.
I was shocked at how expensive they
Yeah,
were.
Yeah.
this isn't unusual.
Just making sure it was in the pro forma.
So to answer your question, I do have some ranges that we've developed, and I'll be refining those for Phil here a little bit later in the next day or so. This, again, is on the east side of the roundabout. Keep in mind that it's coupled with the west side, so these two elements together, right now, we're thinking that, again, also depending on how far the panels go, because these panels are somewhat expensive as well. They're a unique element as well. Between 90 and 110,000
Per sign.
at that point for just this component, these components here, this one and that one.
Dell, are you talking also of using this type of a concept for all the wayfaring signs, street signs? I mean, obviously it's going to flow all the way through then.
Depending on what you folks feel, we would be probably looking at a scaled-down version of this, if this were the choice that you made, that would be a slightly lower element here, still incorporate the wood columns. The name of the streets might go vertically at the intersections. So on this side, it might read whatever the name of the street might be, and on this side, it might be you're approaching Atlas, for instance. Incorporating the logo, I doubt we would see an element quite that large. Again, at intersections, sight lines become very important for safety and things like that.
Hey, Dell, along the lines of what Mick was asking earlier, when you started doing this presentation, I was thinking, these timbers and so forth look really great the first few years, but what do you think about these pilings and big timbers and things as far as the longevity and how, the maintenance and so forth?
Well, the timbers will be the things that will wear out the first, let's say. They'll age at the fastest rate. The biggest thing will be that they would have to be metal capped, which we illustrate on each one of all of these, the posts. These would all have to be metal capped, so we don't get any moisture and snow sitting right on the open grain of the wood. They're going to have to be treated too. Over time, I don't think you can only put one stain on it as it's built and then walk away. Anything with wood on it, as you all know, has to have some sort of routine maintenance. Bill Greenwood's not here, is he? No.
So is there going to be an HOA?
We could do them out of concrete, as Phil mentions. These, you could probably do those out of concrete with wood grain and stain or integral color. And unless you walked up to them and touched them, you may not even know that they're not wood.
That's true, I've seen that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that might be worth it. I'm kind of wondering, we've got these entrance signs, and that's one thing. And then as far as just some of the different intersections as you go through the development, they're not, standout intersections, just your average intersections. I mean, I'm thinking of, I believe in the concept of keeping this theme through there, but there should be something that's a little bit lower intensity, lower expense.
Yeah.
Like for lack of a better example, you go through Coeur d'Alene Place, he has that sort of a logo that he has at each of the intersections, but it's not horrendously expensive. It's not cheap, but it's not horrendously expensive.
I agree with you, and I'm a proponent of that. Phil and I were just talking about it as we started to explore these designs. Well, is there an opportunity to use them? And I've only got the one as an example here, but is there a hierarchy of intersections? Well, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Got a lot of interior
6.
ones, yeah.
Yeah, so in my opinion, the hierarchy would at least be access into the interior off of Atlas. But I think there is an opportunity to do that, and I think it adds to the entire sort of ambiance and what the overall development character is. I think these kinds of gateway, monumentation signage and things, they make a statement about the development. I think as people look to move into what will be, in my mind, one of the more exclusive developments in town, with the opportunity, since there's just not that much waterfront property around, and this isn't all right on the water, but the entire development has access to the water, I think it becomes a very exclusive community. And I think these things add to that exclusivity a little bit.
I think you're right. I agree with all the dots you've got at the entrances. And I'm just speaking really as you get past the entrances where all the circles are there, you get into the interior intersections, you're going to need signs to
Yes.
tell you
Yep.
what the intersections are. So I'm just saying that there should be some way to, I mean, it's not going to be your average green street sign expense-wise that comes from the street department. It's going to be considerably more money, but something that's cost-effective that keeps, that theme at the various street intersections throughout the development.
No, I agree with you.
And I agree with you. This is going to be a fairly high-end neighborhood. It's kind of like a master plan Sanders Beach or something like that, I mean, not everybody has frontage on Sanders Beach, but those homes are a premium anywhere in that Sanders Beach neighborhood.
Yes, I want to, let me finish answering your question. I only gave you the cost of the first one.
Yeah. And it may be whichever concept we do, it's still, the fencing is still there.
Well, I would suggest that
Right.
there's at least the introduction of that, and
Yeah.
with the option of how far, for instance, how far you might want to take it. In this case, I've taken it almost to the end of what the wall would be, but it does go past this crosswalk, and this one goes slightly past that crosswalk. It's not to say, too, that maybe once you are slightly removed from the monumentation signage, that these panels get incorporated at other locations, but they're used almost as part of the landscape. And rather than having 3 grass plants in a row, maybe you end up with a panel. I think there's opportunities to introduce or use it and design that way too. This one, which is, would be at Hartwood and is scaled down considerably from the Atlas Roundabout, is more in the neighborhood of the 40 to 55,000. Again, these panels, you can see that I've shortened them considerably from the others that would have run probably to there or back into here. These, because they're the simplest of all of them, are in the, we have a range $23,000 to $27,000. And just out of interest, as we started to develop some ideas for intersection signage, we were looking at those that might be more in the $5,000 range.
The one thing that's just kind of gnawing on me here a little bit is when you looked at the first shots you were showing, the first photographs in the very start, a lot of those look really rich. And I kind of agree, it's a one-time shot we have on this to make this a really unique piece of property. I don't feel that richness with kind of the concept you're showing here. I feel it's almost a little bit too rustic.
Okay.
It's just my opinion.
No, that's the kind of input that I would look for if we're looking to move on and refine these out to a full design. That's the kind of input I'd like to hear.
What did you think about his second concept? You said you didn't like it.
It looks like something I almost see in Hawaii with the waves coming up.
Oh.
It doesn't really look like it fits here. I mean,
It looked more like saltwater waves?
yeah. Should be surfing. No, I mean, as an example, I think these look really rich. I think if you pulled up and were pulling into this location, you would know you were going somewhere that's very nice and exclusive and so on and so forth. And we've all seen those kind of entryways.
Mhm.
I just felt the other ones looked a little bit like we're going on the cheaper, and the prices you quoted don't sound that way, but it just does not feel the richness of this, what this potential area could be.
Well, I do think, and I think you made a suggestion, did we consider stone?
Mhm.
And I do think that really well-done stonework on these types of signs adds a lot to
I
them.
agree with that.
I think, but the key there is well-done stone. I think a lot of times you'll see stone integrated into some sort of a design, and it can drastically take away from the character, I believe, and the quality of the sign. This has some very nice stonework in it, not only as a base, but then integrated in this element and in this element of that sign. This has nice stonework done too, and becomes not only the base, but becomes one of the major vertical elements as well.
To me, that one looks like it could be here.
Yes, this one,
The upper one looks
very
like Palm
southwest.
Springs or Las Vegas. It
yeah,
doesn't-
I think it is. It's a Del Webb community,
Yeah.
so it could very well be either location. This does look like it could be here, with the exception maybe of the windmill, unless that's the police.
I think the fear of stone, though, is dating itself, too, because sometimes it may look 80s, sometimes it may look
Yeah.
a little
I
bit
mean,
more.
I think of all the rock work we've done along the waterfront down there, not that we want to incorporate the big boulders, but I think you can use smaller concepts of that. I mean, I always think the Northwest River rock always looks beautiful. I mean, the colors and everything, but, you know, that's just the style I like.
I guess the second concept incorporated the big boulders next to it anyway, which was nice.
I just thought the first concept had too much concrete. If the bases were stone, it would soften it for me.
And
But
I actually kind of disagree with Mick on the fact, like, I think that, I mean, are we going for rich neighborhood here?
Well,
I mean, we were talking about hitting that, some of the missing middle in terms of what the market really needs, and so I would err on trying to have that balance and not necessarily.
Richness means quality.
Okay,
I mean, I think-
okay.
I mean, I think we're looking for a really high quality, I mean, I think it's gonna be pretty high end. I mean, I don't think
Yeah.
we're gonna have, Section 8 housing.
Well,
down
right,
there.
right, yeah. No, I agree. I think it needs to look very nice, but just trying to have that balance.
I'll let you take another look at the,
So the main entry sign was 100 and, what, 100 and some thousand? 110.
yeah, 90 to 110.
Yeah. I mean,
This,
this could,
this one I haven't fully priced, but I believe it's significantly less because of it much shorter in its size, and the concrete element is not quite as large. This one, too, could actually have stone at its base as well.
Could you do a hybrid?
Like maybe use core 10 instead of concrete at the other one, or
Yeah.
steel.
To make it more
Yeah,
cost effective?
I think we could do something like that.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know if aesthetically if that
but
looks
whenever,
nice or not.
yeah, I mean, we'll all have our favorites. Like, I kind of like that one. The price makes me like it too.
I mean, I think the idea of the saw blade's kind of unique. I mean, it's kind of,
I agree.
and one of the things that I guess I liked about the saw blade concept versus this concept is it becomes a little bit of the logo that you can maybe go to market with and those types of things.
Well, it was, that was our thought too, that this could be the logo
Yeah.
for, whether it's the advertising, the letterhead, the whole.
I mean, you're going to have something to market this with, and you want something that's distinct as a logo, and
Yeah.
that kind of jumped out as a little bit of that logo look. The other one doesn't.
A lot of time, and I've only done a little bit of logo work in my career, but what I've taken away from it is that the simpler and cleaner that you can make it usually is the most eye-appealing and easier to use in publication and things like that.
I see a lot of your logos over the years, and I think you're pretty good at logos.
I agree.
You're too modest.
What I like is the fact I knew exactly what it was when I saw it.
Yeah,
I just wonder if,
Not like, what is that?
I don't know if we're gonna hit the missing middle in this project, because I mean, we're torn two different ways between maximizing the return back
Well, I
to the
think the missing
taxpayers
middle was
here.
500 to 600,000.
If that's the middle, we might make that.
That's
But,
what, that's
you
what
know.
it was in the market analysis.
But I wonder if we don't have to compromise, and I mean, I'm okay with the saw blade logo, but I mean, maybe the grand design is too grand, and maybe, something a little more scaled down with the saw blade or something, I mean, we got to, somewhere here, we've got to get a classy look, but not, go crazy spending money on signage. I know the signage isn't cheap, we're gonna spend a lot of money no matter what.
it sounds as though you folks might like to see another, say, hybrid option to consider.
I think
Yeah.
that would be well worth looking
Yeah.
at.
You got
And
picky
also,
clients
I-
like us once in a while, don't you?
I think, this isn't the point to worry about the price of it.
Yeah.
frankly. I mean, with everything, the span of this whole thing, this is going to be, this is a small piece of the thing, but it's going to make such a statement. And we don't want to shut off, the concepts before, so like I would say, I mean, go with what we like, and then, you could put the pencil to it, but,
That's a
I
good
agree.
point.
That's my
That's a good point.
I mean, yeah, you look at the scale of this development, saving $25,000 on a sign is not probably a place to start.
But the city wants to be repaid.
Yeah. I don't, well, they told me to do the hybrid. I mean, I think we all agree it's got to be classy and we're going to spend some money. But
I still think we need something that's going to be somewhat of a logo. And the second concept, I just don't see a logo coming out of that. I mean, those funny waves, that's not going to be something that's going to be distinct to market this development with that look. I think if you had this as your logo for marketing, you could take off from that.
I can go with that.
I'd agree with that, too.
I agree with that too. You could have one of those at every intersection with just a street name on it type of thing. I mean, something very simple.
But I also think of, when the developer goes in and starts to decide he's going to sell this and starts putting out pamphlets and stuff, you want a logo that carries the entire
Yeah.
development through.
Yes.
We need something like this to be on that.
I just think the grand entrance with a saw blade had too much concrete and it needed a little refining and softening.
Okay.
I'm okay with a saw blade logo, you know, I mean, you got a big concrete sign, then you got concrete columns below it that it's sitting on, concrete bases, I guess, rather than
That looks a little
columns.
cold to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
And I'm
just,
not an artist by any means.
I mean, I've seen subdivisions that have that, but I mean, to me, it's just a little too much. I mean, maybe the bases could be stone and
Too industrial.
Yeah, it
And,
looks very
yeah.
industrial.
maybe the bases could be stone and then instead of concrete for that sign, that could be that Corten. I don't know. I mean,
Well, I think,
one difficulty you got with us, when you're dealing with a board like this, you don't have one developer sitting in your office that you're working with on this. You got everybody sitting here, and I understand what you're up against.
well, I think it might be beneficial to take this concept, look at trying to soften a little bit so it isn't quite so industrial looking. And it seems as though most people feel that the logo is something that could work.
Yeah.
I can work on this one as some modifications as a hybrid. Take this logo and maybe look at how it might move into something like this. This one
Yeah.
also could possibly be not quite as industrial.
Yeah.
The one thing that I do think that both of them lack, this one, we felt we could add some stuff to it, would be a little bit of color.
Sure.
And I think color always is helpful, even if it's not the most prominent element, but that it is enough to have an accent.
I think you're right. Maybe you could powder coat a little color into something.
Maybe in that wave. No, I was kidding.
Yeah, so it looks like fresh water.
Just kidding.
And in terms of just laying it out on the table, but hopefully don't have thin feelings, but the saw blade one, you know, I get that and all of that, and maybe it's my error, but when I see that, it's the Pac-Man thing. I mean, that's what jumps out at me,
I'm
and
gonna think that.
Now I'm going to
that's,
think that too. I didn't even think that.
It sort of does look like Pac-Man, I
But-
guess, now that you mention it.
but a lot of people may, yeah,
That's
like
funny.
that. so.
Yeah, I guess maybe you can think about that Pac-Man. I don't know.
Well, I've seen over time
Dan's wrecked it
logos
for me.
that, you know, it's like, boy, I mean, went through all of this process, and then when it comes out and
Oh my
somebody
gosh,
says,
that's funny.
oh, well, that looks like, you know, such and such.
It
But
depends on what
anyway, that's
demographic
just
you're trying to hit.
My
I
2
can,
cents.
When we developed that logo, we were looking at the name of the development as Atlas Waterfront, and rather than just put a true saw blade there, we felt that that was enough to suggest the history of the mill.
Oh, I like
And
that.
these
Yeah.
could be refined to become more the waterfront wave. So that was the thinking behind that logo. And in fact, it might be that this logo, that the splash of color that we're talking about becomes these two elements of the wave that.
Oh,
I think you're right.
Good.
Yeah.
It's funny, I thought it looked more like the Cougar, the Washington State Cougar logo.
I can see that in there too.
The more you look at these
Yeah.
things, you can see a lot of stuff.
Okay, Tony, what do you need for action from us tonight? We could sit here and talk about this for a week and not get
I
anywhere.
don't know if we need any action. I think the board gave direction.
Yep, I think Dell has that.
Can you hear me, Jen?
You don't think that person standing there looks like an Idaho vandal, do you?
They have their mask on.
I
Yep, these guys mask.
think the board gave direction to Dell. Dell, do you have enough direction to maybe come up with a next refined concept?
I think so.
Clear as mud.
Nice, though. Very nice.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah, thank
locations,
you.
too, are good.
Thank you.
Yeah, you did a great job, Bill.
So the next item I have on the agenda, Mr. Chairman, is approval of the Welchcomer contract amendments. As I shared with you, Amendment 10A, that is focused on Area 10 for civil design services. Amendment 14, which focuses on Area 12 for civil design services. And Amendment 15, that focuses on Area 13 for site civil design services. And Once again, these are amendments that we will receive the funds from the developers, that we will reimburse Welchcomer for their services.
My only question was, do we need an agreement written up between the Chase and Ignite for these services? Okay,
To include that payment.
okay, thank you.
Is that three separate motions or?
There's three separate amendments.
And
Just one.
for all three amendments?
I move that we approve Amendment
And
10A, Amendment 14, and Amendment 15.
Second.
moved and seconded. And again, this will be paid back when, by the developer. All right. Okay. Any further discussion? Questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, that motion carries.
Finally, Mr. Chairman, just a recurring agenda item for the support for emergency economic community needs. Is there any conversation from the board on that topic this evening?
Tony, have you received any requests from anybody? I mean, that haven't presented here?
No, the only pending request we have is that you recall the Downtown Association came to the agency back in the summer, I think it was in June, and they are anticipating coming to the board for a conversation at the December board meeting, but we have not received any formal request.
Okay.
For funds, okay. Thank you.
That's it.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Next, it's time for board commissioner comments.
I have a message from Commissioner Mandel. Please shop local this holiday season and support our local businesses who always need our support, but especially during the pandemic's effects on the economy. I echo her message.
I love that idea, shop local,
That makes sense.
support your favorite little spot.
Shop and eat local,
Safely.
safely.
Anything else? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thanks.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.